I'm Ian. I'm one of the tutors. Hopefully you, and I'm joined by everybody else. We'll introduce him in a second. Hopefully you have got the link to the Miro board, or you have got the Miro board. If not, it's in the chat, and you can click onto it. And the Miro board is kind of where most of the stuff, in fact, everything tonight is going to happen. And the chat, Google Meet is really the way that we're communicating, but all the information's in Miro. So you don't really need to sit with Google Chat open, or Google Meet, should I say. So we'll kind of quickly go round the team, and everybody can say hello. You'll get to hear most of us as the night goes on. So you're starting off with me. I'm Ian. We have also got Maggie on the call.
Hi.
Colin's there as well.
Hello.
Gordon is there as well.
Yeah.
And Brendan's in the background as well, sorting all the techie stuff out. He is the man at STACS who's recording these sessions. So these sessions are all recorded. So kind of by being here, we are assuming that you're okay with recording as well. I'm just kind of looking through the list of things that I'm meant to be saying right now, and I've done most of them. Working on the Miro board, so there's quite a few of us on the call. So as we're going round, you might see lots of cursors flying around. So that's why each slide there's kind of a cursor park where you can pop it in. We've also got lots of reactions in Miro. So up on my screen, it's on the top right, there's a wee megaphone-y thing, and you can give a reaction. There's Gordon going through them all. If you like something, if something's confusing you, I feel later on that the head exploding emoji might be used when we get onto some of the stuff that Colin and Gordon are going to look at.
Don't throw us under the bus already. It's only 7:05.
The Miro board at times can be quite confusing to use. So what one of us will generally do is when we're presenting, we'll press the present button. You'll be able to then join that present, and kind of you'll follow us as we go through. Yeah, done that. I don't think there's anything else I've got to say. Colin's meant to chime in at some point and help with this introduction, but I've lost the notes.
So just in terms of the kind of structure, we're going to look.
You go for that.
Okay, and then it's going to be what has been euphemistically called floaty stuff.
Yep, so it's very much kind of an introduction, the floaty stuff that we're going to be doing. We're not going to overload you with the CSS from Hire, because we know everyone's just started back either last week or this week. So we'll look at kind of floating around, and we'll look at more context about paddings, margins, adding content, etc. later. So we'll get started by looking at forms in HTML from Hire. So Maggie is going to join and lead us through this bit.
I've gone into present mode. Ian, can you see that now? Can you? No.
Ian, you're muted.
Ian, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I meant to turn my camera off, but I muted myself.
Yeah. Can
yeah,
you
I can
see
you.
Ian present?
Yep, I can.
You can, right.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Right, welcome everybody. Before we start looking at forms and validation, it's maybe important to consider the meaning of validation and why it's so important. Also to look at the fact that it is studied at SDD and DDD. And if you're doing web, you won't have covered the validation that comes up in databases. Okay, Ian.
Yep, I agree with what you said, and you've just said what I was going to be saying.
Okay, so on our first, we should all be on topic 1A. It's just the kind of introduction slide to validation, to talk you through a wee bit about the meaning of validation and the the validation types that we'll come across. Is everyone on 1A? That's the slide that's got 3 on the left-hand side and then one big one on the left-hand side. Thanks for the thumbs up. So validation is making sure that your system, whether it's software, whether it's database, or whether it's web, that the data entering that system is as valid as possible. The sort of old saying of rubbish in then produces rubbish being processed and displayed as results as your output. That's why that's we kind of bins there of in and out. Then giving you down on to the next slide, I'll hand over to Ian to talk about just an example from STD.
Yeah, so we've got an example here from software in a flowchart form, where we want the user to enter a number of tickets between 5 and 10 inclusively. The flowchart shows that the loop must be coded in order to continually ask for tickets until a valid number is entered. So this could be coded in a conditional loop, and the example of the code, the example of the flowchart kind of would show how we would implement it in Python. So we've got the initial input. We then go into a loop where we've got a decision deciding whether the ticket's amount is valid, and if it's not valid, we're looping back around and got another input statement, and we'd probably have a wee error message in there as well, telling us at some point that we were incorrect.
Yeah, and that you can see that from the code there. If you're a Python person or whatever language you code in, it'll look fairly similar to that example there. However, when we start to look at web and at higher level forms and the type of validation that's required from there, it really relates well to the database validation that's taught. And if you haven't taught that because you're doing web, then it's important to spend time going over that with the pupils. So the 4 validations that we will look at are range, length, presence, and restricted choice.
So we start with a range check at the top of that slide, and range is about allowing for a range of numbers to be entered. So in the previous example, it was tickets between 5 and 10. In the example in this screenshot here, we're allowing any number between 100 and 200. And if you look at the screenshot, we can see the users entered 50. So we've actually got an error message there to say, actually, this isn't within the valid range that we want. We then follow on to a length check, and this checks that the data is a specific length. So it can be up to a maximum length, or it has to be a fixed length. So, maximum length, if we're talking about Scottish candidate numbers, it has to be a certain number of characters, or if we're talking about a person's name, it can't be longer than however many characters.
Okay, and then a presence check is just the data must be entered in that field. Okay, so it's that they've got to put something in that field. It can't be left blank. It can't be left null. And we'll come back on to when we look at the design. We'll come back on to the wee sort of star that's there. And then finally, we've got a restricted choice that gives the user a selection of entry, which is really good if you already know that it's maybe days of the week, or you know what the data you want to be entered. Then you can provide a list to the user, and it helps with the consistency of your data as well. It means that everyone, if they're entering for a Monday and you've got a Monday on your list, we're not getting lowercase Mondays or just Mon. We're getting exactly what we want, and it's consistent. And this type of validation also allows for multiple selections on a sort of drop down box there.
When you're introducing your students to these kind of examples, whether that be as part of databases at National 5 or within the web at Higher, using real life examples is always a good idea. So going on to the Young Scot website and showing the process of applying for a card and discussing where the validation comes in, or providing for a provisional driving license, or going and booking a holiday to somewhere, and how the input validation there makes sure the data is accurate as possible, so that your system's not dealing with rubbish, as we touched upon.
Yeah, okay. So moving on to the next frame now, and we can take away the and we should now display. Can everyone see a wireframe of our coffee shop? Brilliant, thank you. This was a coffee shop website that we kind of started off when we were looking at the analysis and the functional requirements. One of the functional requirements was to have a form where you could click and collect. So designed a wireframe for a form, and in the wireframe, and this could be, kids could be asked to do this at an assignment, we've labelled the validation on the form. So,
as well as assignment, they could be asked, and quite often you will see this kind of in an exam as well. And
yeah.
there are marks awarded for the validation, and we've found with our own candidates that the validation, showing that on the form, is probably the worst bit that's done in the design. So if we look at the name portion of there are actually two types of validation applied to the name field. It says we've got a maximum size characters of 10, so we know that we've got to put a length check in place, and there is also a presence check. Now, this design denotes that presence checks two ways. It's got the word required. We all know what that means. It's got to be there. But there's also got that asterisk. Now, most of us here tonight will know that when you see an asterisk with a form, that means it's required. But it's just about making sure our students are aware that when they see an asterisk, that means they've got to put in a presence check, and make sure that that value has to be there.
Okay, and then the next is a couple of drop-down boxes. So they've been kind of indicated with arrows, and then for the faculty over to the right-hand side, we've listed the things that will go in that drop-down box. So even though we've got design, we're able to see there exactly what needs to be coded to put into that drop-down box. And also for the select day, we've got a Monday to Friday entries that will be in that drop-down box.
The collection time coming down has got a wee range check applied to it that's only accepting values between 9 and 15 in there, working on a 24-hour clock. Okay,
and then the last bit is our additional options. What else did we want added to our coffee or whatever? We've got our selection from over on the left-hand side there, but also we're saying we want to be able to see 4 of them, and we want to be able to select multiple ones. Okay, so you might want the caramel syrup with oat milk, and your drop-down box should be able to select both of those. And this is something we can look at when we go on to do testing. So that's taken us through. If we look back, think back at the functional requirements, we've now got the design of the form. We're now going to go on and show you about the implementation side of things. So if I move over to the next frame, and I'm just going to take away the first one here. You might want to zoom in that a wee bit to see if the code and to see what we're showing here. So we're going to use the coffee shop to demonstrate examples of input validation. When we originally, or when Ian originally coded this, we didn't have validation on it. So we're going to look at the different ways of validating the 4 types of validation we looked at and the validation that we've put on our design. So firstly, a range check.
So you can see in the top screenshot there, we've entered the collection time of 27. The form has allowed us to enter that because, as Maggie said, when I designed this form, I was thinking about how it looked as opposed to how it functioned. So we didn't put any validation in. So the input type, within the input tag, we add the min attribute and we add the max attribute. So the minimum is obviously what's the lowest number we're going to accept, and then max is what the maximum number we can accept. And this kind of, again, make sure we don't get that rubbish in, rubbish out idea of things.
Before we move on, Ian, can I ask what the name attribute is in that input line?
Yeah, so the reason we name something, so we can see here within that input, it's type number and it's got that name, links towards progression as we're looking at. So this means that it can be sent to a PHP or a JavaScript, a PHP script or a JavaScript script, which is not something we do at higher, but it's useful for advanced higher. And it's also good practice that we know within the code what is it that I'm collecting the data about. I can see clearly that I'm collecting the data about the time.
So it's almost like giving that data, it's almost like a variable name.
Yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is essentially a variable name, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we'll move on to the length check, and I'll just again get rid of that screen. So you now see the validation on the form from the coffee shop website for max length. Okay, so this is where you want to make sure that the user has entered up to a certain amount of characters. Okay, so currently in that form with no validation on the input line, I can type in as many letters as I want. So all I need to do to validate that line is to put a max length equal to 10. And that means the user will not be allowed to type any more than 10 characters in that field. Okay, now the max length refers to the data. If you want to make the text box bigger, you would use the size attribute, which isn't really validation, it's just kind of formatting your text box. So they're slightly different attributes, the size and the max length.
So with the max length, I would be able to enter, in this example, 6 characters.
Yes, exactly, yep.
So what if I only wanted exactly 10?
Well, that's where you actually have to use something called the min length and the max length. So you've got an attribute called min length. So if you set min length to 10 and max length to 10, then they have to enter 10 characters. Okay. And if you're doing databases and Access, you can do that with a kind of like validation as well. So they're comparable there. So min length and max length can be used together to get a fixed length data into a field. Okay, so that's quite a useful one to remember. Okay, so on to the next one.
So this one here we've got is a presence check. And if we look again, using the name example, we've got our length check in there as well. But we can, with the first example at the top there, we can leave it blank. But it would be very difficult to deliver a coffee order in a school if we didn't know who the teacher was that we were delivering it to. So at the bottom example there, we've added the required attribute. And this means that we have to enter information into it. And you can see in the browser there on the tooltip, we've kind of got the browser telling us that we actually need this information. We need it to be filled in. So the required and the max length, all these attributes, the max length and the required, they can be combined together within the tag, as if it were.
Perfect. And then finally, we've got our restricted choice, where you use the select element to list what your choices are going to be. So that'll be within your form element. Again, we've named it. You can see that the size equals 4, and we had that, remember, on our design. We had the size equal 4. And if you want to choose, there should be multiple in there. There should have been another green. I don't know where that one's gone, but we'll show you that in the testing. If you put multiple in there, you would be able to choose multiple options. Okay. Now, one of the things to ensure that pupils understand is they do have to test these. Once they put that code on, they should go ahead and test them. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to show you how we would test each one of these. So we should now all be on frame 1B, and the first test is on a range check. And we're not just forgetting everything we've learned at N5 because we're into higher now. We want to remember when we talked about testing, we talked about normal, extreme and exceptional. So again, those terms can certainly be used again in this type of testing, particularly for your range check where it's very obvious you could put normal, extreme and exceptional. So what we've done there is created a small test table with a number of test cases, the type of data, whether it's normal, extreme or exceptional, what the data is, what you would expect to happen, and what actually happened when you run the form. So we have a normal test case at 10, we have an extreme one at 9, another extreme one at 15, and then an exceptional one of 23, and you would hope that that data would be rejected. Okay.
So in the length test here, we're looking at taking their max length. So again, we're picking that idea for picking normal, extreme, and exceptional test cases. So we're looking at normal, because this is just max length, normal should be any value under 10 characters that we should accept. We've got an extreme, which is the name of exactly 10 characters, and we've got an exceptional of more than 10 characters. And we've tested that in a form, and that's the results that we expect to see. And then we've got the actual, which hopefully, if we've implemented it correctly, will give us the exact same result. But that's an opportunity. Sometimes my candidates, for some reason, put max and length as 2 words. So this is when it'd be alerted to them, oh, I've done something wrong.
Yeah, because with HTML, as simple typos don't, it still runs the form, but that's when you're really checking that your code is working, and simple typo errors can be picked up at that point. Yeah. Presence check is really just to make sure that something is entered in the field. It's still the name field that we're requiring not only a max length of 10, but actually something entered in there, and we should get that kind of error message from the browser if nothing is entered in there.
So you can see in this example here, in the code, we've got that multiple property added to the select attribute. So the idea being that we should be able to select multiple items within our list using the control key on the keyboard. So here we're looking to do, can I submit the form with just one item selected? And then again, we've got the idea of, can I do it with multiple items selected as well? And again, that idea of what I expect to happen, go and run it and make sure it actually happens. And this is where I find the students see, oh, I've not actually put the multiple tag in the multiple attribute.
Because then, they're really checking that their form is matching the design that they had. So it'd be good to have even the form design in front of them, and they're ticking off the validation as they're testing it. And it's that whole, what we've been talking about from the very first session, that, it's agile, you're going back and forward between different stages. So I hope that's given you an idea of input validation on a HTML form, because that's one of the things that was highlighted that wasn't well done. And also for progression here, if your pupils are hoping to go on and do advanced hire, input validation is a must in the advanced hire project, and it's something that's missed out, particularly on web forms. So if we can build in a good method and process of doing it at higher level, when they come to do that advanced hire, they should fully understand that they have to validate their input on a form that's created, because that's an essential as part of a web project at advanced hire. And I think they actually enjoy the fact that they do something with their form at advanced hire, that the data actually goes somewhere and they can send it to a database once they hit the submit button and their data all goes through. So I think it all starts to come together a bit more at advanced hire. Okay, so that's us kind of finished the bit in forms. The next frame simply gives you post-its if you would like to give us some feedback on that, or if you'd like further information on anything that we've talked about, that we'd be happy to do that. Trying to read some of the validations.
I know I'm just reading that comment about might be good to add a test for 0 items selected on the last example, which is the multiple, which is the restricted choice. Would that be acceptable? Well, there's nothing that says a presence check has to be on, in the design anyway. It said nothing about a presence check on
that's true, yeah.
on additional options. So yeah, actually a test case of 0 items should be allowed, because actually I don't want caramel syrup, vanilla syrup, decaf or oat milk coffee. So yeah, it should
be, yeah.
Should be.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Colin and Gordon to lead us through section 2, which is all about floaty stuff. So let's go to the swimming pool.
Yeah, thanks. The floaty stuff. This could be interesting. Thanks to Maggie and to Ian for taking us through the wonderful world of forms. This is where we could get interesting, so we'll see how this goes. So my glamorous assistant has just emptied the swimming pool that is on topic 2A. So if you're not already on topic 2A, if you can head over to that one. Oh, nice. We've got a wee presentation to join. So we're all just back from our Christmas holidays. Let's fast forward to summer, where you're lying by the pool at your tropical resort with your drink in hand, and you're thinking about HTML and CSS.
Oh, that does sound wonderful, Colin. I mean, apart from the HTML and CSS part, I'm trying to keep my head above water here and be prepared for lots of puns. I keep getting tangled in floating blocks and all that sort of stuff. Can you maybe explain them to me in a way that doesn't make me want to sink to the bottom of the pool?
Oh dear, this is going to be long and torturous. But okay, let's go in with floaty things, and we'll start with blocks. So imagine our swimming pool, so the big kind of blue rectangle on the left, and then we've got various objects that we want to have floating in our swimming pool. So we don't, if we just put things into the pool, then they just start kind of drifting around all on its own.
So which of the things we can put in the pool then are like block elements?
Well, the big giant inflatable obstacle course thing, it's going to take up the whole width of our swimming pool. So it's a block element, and there's nothing that can float past it.
So if I kind of put that in there, then we've got the kind of flow of the pool going up and to the left. Nothing's going to get past that.
So that would be a block element. It takes up the entire width, whether the content of that block element takes up the full width or not. That blocked out that full width, and nothing can float past it. It's the main part of the page, so it's demanding its own space all to itself.
Okay, so that makes sense. I can see we've got some pool noodles over here. What are they?
So the pool noodles are there to represent the inline elements. So they flow with the current. So like words in the sentence fitting round without actually taking over anything. But there is that wee current that Gordon mentioned earlier that kind of pulls things up and to the left.
So that first one, trying to put that in the pool, that's going to float up and to the left and kind of sit in there, but it's not going to be able to float past that pool element. I think I'm starting to get it. What about if I put in another noodle? Where's that going to kind of float up to?
Well, it follows that inline element and goes next to it, unless we start changing its natural behavior and use the float property to actually force it to go somewhere else.
Okay, so each of these pool noodles, as I put them in, is kind of going to float up just to sit next to each other. But when we get to the full width of the pool, or even not quite the full width, but they're kind of sitting there, this fifth one, that's just going to kind of naturally take itself into here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But if we then put another block element, another one of these, that's just going to take up the full width again, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what about this unicorn floaty thing? What if we only want that over at the right-hand side?
So its natural tendency would be to go up and to the left, and then we would need to change its properties so that we are floating it to a specific place. In this case, we want to kind of anchor it so that it's tied with a rope to the edge of the pool and it's not going to float anywhere off on its own.
Cool. And something that I quite often see in pools and web pages is weird overlapping things starting to happen, things sitting on top of each other.
So that's where our clear both property comes in, and it's like creating a wave that pushes everything below the floated element down. So it clears some space and it forces the next thing onto its own kind of line of the swimming pool, almost like its own sort of lane.
Okay, so it's to do with positioning, but it's also to do with that kind of flow up towards the top left, and then we can change the behaviors to overrule it. This pool party analogy is, I think it's sinking in. Sorry, I think I can finally navigate some of these web layouts without getting too badly waterlogged.
Oh dear. So the best way to kind of work with this is to experiment with different types and use floats to put places and try and see what happens, because it doesn't always work like you expect it to work, and that's where we'll kind of take it on and look at some code and actually how you can use this in your web pages.
So with a little imagination and torturing this poolside analogy, mastering kind of float, block, and inline elements is a bit of a breeze. I think we should maybe dive into web pages and create some waves.
Let's move on as quickly as we can past that, shall we?
Yeah.
So this is a kind of task that I use with my classes to introduce float and clear and try and get a kind of idea of how this stuff actually works. So we start off with just a wee simple setup where you've got effectively just some divs, and each div is given a size. It doesn't matter what size you give it. We've just gone with 100 by 100 here. Each div has its own background color as well, so you can see the individual divs, and we've named them blue, green, and red and yellow just to aid the kind of understanding.
So realistically, in that, we're actually only really using Nat5 skills at this point. We've not introduced anything really higher, have we?
No, this is all just Nat5 stuff.
Cool.
So the idea is that we're going to be using float to change the position of these particular divs. So if we do a float left, first of all, and we've applied that float left to all the divs, so just at line 4 there, we've added in that float left property. And what they do is they all move from being vertical to being horizontal.
Okay, so divs are block elements. They're like that big obstacle course. They take up the full width, but because we've kind of set that size for them in the CSS, and we've set them to float left, they're starting to behave a little bit more like the pool noodles. We've changed their behaviors with those CSS properties.
Absolutely. So if we move on to 2B3, This time what we're doing is floating to the right. So again, we've just changed that property in the div at line 4 of the CSS to float right. And now something kind of almost a bit unusual is happening, that they're now still horizontally, but they're in a different order. So it's now yellow, then red, then green, then blue.
I think that would be a really good question to ask the pupils. You know, show them this behaviour happening, and see what reasons they might come up with for it. So I don't know if it's worth gathering some thoughts from, maybe we'll put a couple ideas into the chat about the sorts of things that pupils might come up with. Let's see if anybody can figure out how. Or even if they want to unmute and give us a couple of ideas about why is that happening? Why are they in the reverse order? No?
Radio silence.
Hello?
Radio silence.
Oh, is my mic on?
Hi, yeah.
Yeah. So it's reversed it defaults to floating to the left. Yeah. So up and to the left, and now because it's floating up and to the right, the first element is going to float that way and fill in that gap, and then the other ones are just going to follow suit effectively. So it's just following the behavior, but reversed. So it floats to the right side to the left in that order.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all to do with the sequence of the code. Because the first div is the blue div, it gets positioned first, and that's why it's gone top right. And then all the other divs have followed in behind it effectively. It's almost like they're kind of chained together, and they've just followed one after another after another.
So it's kind of like those pool noodles, I suppose. For the first pool noodle put in would float up and then to the right. Then the second one would stack up to its left, the third one to the left, and so on.
So with those kind of first two examples, we've applied the float to all the divs. Let's just try adding the float to one of the divs. So from this code, we've just floated the blue div and we've floated it to the right. And the question here is, okay, the blue div has gone top right, but why has the green div gone top left?
Well, let's see if anybody's got any ideas on that one.
Me again. Would it be that so because it's the first one there is the blue one, and it's floating to the right, so it goes to obviously to take the right, floats up to there, and because you've not specified a float for the other ones, they're all going to default to the original behavior, which is to float to the left, and they'll go in that order: green, red, and yellow, because that's the sequence of the code.
Perfect. Yep, absolutely spot on. The green one's got basically nothing in its way because the blue one's been floated out the road, so it just follows in to kind of fill the gap, and that's why it goes top left, because the blue one's out the way at the top right.
Yeah, we're just seeing the chat there as well, because the float's not on the div. Yeah, so the blue one is essentially taken out of the main flow, if you want to look at it that way. And then the green, red, and yellow just naturally flow back into where they would. It's as if the blue one wasn't there. It's not interacting with them really in any way.
Okay, so we've floated to the right and we've seen what happens. Let's see what happens when we float that blue one, the first div, and we float it to the left. Now, something weird, well, potentially weird, has happened, and the green div seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, it's almost as if the blue div's sitting on top of the green div.
So it's hard to get kind of terminology for this. Extra floaty, super floaty. The blue one has got this property applied to it where it's floated to the front, and so it's effectively sitting on top of, or sitting in front of, the green one that's still there. We just can't see it because the blue one is on top of it.
So it's like making the blue pool noodle float kind of in the air above the green one, I suppose. You know, it's sitting on top of it because it's come out of, because it's floating. We've told it to float left. It's come out of the flow with everything else.
So that's applying floats in various different ways. Let's look at that clear both property. And this time, what we've done is we've floated the blue one to the right again, and then we've applied that clear both property to the green div. So line 5, we've got the blue div floating right, and line 6, we've got the green div clearing both. So why this time has the green div not gone top left? Why is it that bit below?
So it's almost like putting that clear both on the green div is creating a wave at the top of it, pushing it below everything that's above it. So it's kind of pushing itself downwards below the elements above it.
Yeah, so we kind of discussed this a wee bit earlier, or at a previous meeting, and it's kind of like creating lanes in your swimming pool. If we're continuing on with the kind of pool analogy, the blue float or the blue div has its own lane, and then because of the clear both, it's creating a lane for the green one to sit kind of underneath that lane rope, if we're continuing on with that analogy.
Yeah, but the red and yellow, there's just that one lane rope above the green. So the red and yellow just continue behaving naturally as they have done before. I suspect that this analogy is about to start falling apart. Maybe I'll stop so we can kind of focus a bit more on the technicalities.
Are you saying that extra floaty and super floaty are not technical enough here?
I mean, would you accept an exam? I don't know.
Right, so we're going to move on and look at things that are getting a wee bit more sophisticated and a wee bit more complex. So this time we're using kind of floats and clears. So this time we've floated the blue div, the first div, to the right. We've then cleared with the green div. We've floated the red div to the right, and then we've cleared with the yellow div. So now we've got these kind of gaps.
Okay, so what I'm seeing there is the blue div has float right, and then the green has clear both. So that's pushing it down below the blue div, just like we saw on the last thing. The red is then stacking vertically below the green. That would be its natural behavior, but its float right is moving it, is pulling it over to the right hand side, like tethering it. But the yellow then has that clear both, so that's now stacking vertically below the red, but it's not being told to float right, so it's just naturally stacking over to the left hand side.
Yeah, so the green and the yellow are kind of following their natural kind of tendency to be up and to the left, whereas we've applied the float to the blue and the red, and that's why they are out the road over the right hand side. And this one's quite a good example for seeing those kind of lanes in the swimming pool. The red's got a lane of its own, the green's got a lane of its own, the yellow's got a lane of its own, because of those clear properties.
But we're not having to put the clear both on the red, because it's naturally stacking below the green and then just being floated over to the right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So with this one, we have floated the blue to the left, and we've floated the red to the right. And again, the green one's disappeared, but the yellow one is being displayed in line, effectively before the red one, even though the code says do blue, then green, then red, then yellow. Okay,
so green's disappeared. Let me figure this out. It's the same reason as before, isn't it? Blue's extra floaty, super floaty. Let's get technical here. So it's sitting on top of it. Is that because the blue's been told to float left, and yeah, it's become that super floaty? because green doesn't have clear both on it anymore, it's not pushing itself down below blue.
Yep.
Okay. Red then it's stacking vertically below the green, which is still hidden by the blue, but then it's told to float right. Yellow again doesn't have that clear both, so it's able to float up to sit below green, still hidden by the blue, because it doesn't have that clear both on it.
That's it. And it's these kind of scenarios where pupils in your class will start to kind of melt. And where's it gone? Why is it there? How come it's over here? And given them the kind of language to explain what's going on in these, it can be quite tricky. So hopefully this is kind of getting towards that. Kind of getting the hang of this now, I think. So let's look at kind of structuring pages and how you would lay out those in our next couple of examples. So this one here, we've gone with 4 columns. We've got skinny columns at the left and the right, and then we've got wider columns in the middle. I'm regretting my choice of skinny and fat, but it's to kind of emphasize the fact that we've set the different widths. So by changing the widths on the divs, we can create the kind of column structure. We went with percentage widths, and the widths will be quite important as we go through, particularly as we move on to the next session when we're adding in content. But why are these widths important?
Well, I mean, right now these divs, they're just sitting within the browser. So setting them to add up to 100%, 10%, 40%, 40%, 10% is that's 100%. So that will just take up the full width of the browser. The browser right now is the container. Later on, we're going to be looking at putting them boxes in boxes, containers within containers. So I suppose it's kind of like word wrap. If it was too big for it to fit on that line, the yellow would almost be pushed down onto the next line when it gets to the edge of the page.
And that's it. And it's this idea of content sitting within boxes, and these boxes potentially being within other boxes or containers or elements. And that's when the overflow can happen, and that's when it can start to get a bit messy. The next one is a kind of grid layout. And this one we've had to use the floats. So to try and get them all the divs in the right position, we've floated. Why have we had to float all of them?
Well, so this is getting back to what we saw earlier, isn't it? If the green didn't have a float, the float on blue would make it extra floaty. So green would naturally float up to the top left. The blue would then extra super float on top of it, and green would slip underneath it. So I'm guessing it's almost the same for yellow, but without the float, it's going to almost slip underneath the red div, which would be super floaty.
That's it. And here we've applied the float to each individual div. We've not applied it to the kind of div at line 4. And we've gone for each of the kind of IDs, the blue, the green, the red, and the yellow. That was a specific choice. Any suggestions as to why we might choose to just float the individual divs rather than float all the divs?
I'm going to lay a guess. It's probably because we're going to be, this is if we're talking about structure of the page. We're using divs elsewhere in the page, maybe even using divs within those divs. And we don't want them all to float left.
That's it, exactly. So if you start applying floats globally to all the divs, then you'll end up with very weird and wonderful layouts, and probably not what you were expecting.
Yeah. So it makes sense when we're doing that kind of structural layout. I think in the next session, we'll look at different ways of doing that rather than using divs. Where we'll start using more the proper elements for that. But I think it's a really good way of getting that idea of how we lay things out to begin with, using the Nat5 divs.
the last one is a 3-column structure. So this time we've got the big blue div that takes up the full width. That's why its width is set to 100%. Then we've got our 3 columns underneath. We've got our green, our red, and our yellow. But there is a slight issue over at that right-hand side, where if you look at the bottom of the kind of bottom right corner of the blue div, and then the top right corner of the yellow div, there's a gap there. How's that happened? Why have we got a gap?
Well, I mean, this is where my background as a maths teacher comes in, because I know that if we've set them to 33%, and set all the divs to 33%, and then overruled that with the blue one, that'll be 100%. 33 plus 33 plus 33 is 99, which is not 100%. So it's that 1% gap.
And this is where pupils in your class will really get upset and get their knickers in a twist, because they just can't get that last wee bit, which is quite frustrating for some, I would suggest.
So what we're basically saying there is, let's just try and avoid 3 equally sized columns, because it just ends up as quite horrible numbers.
You can make it 33.333333, and the more 3s you add, the closer it will get to that 100%, but that might just blow the minds of your classes.
Yeah, and I suppose when in a website would you have 3 equally sized columns? You'd have, I suppose, maybe something at the left, something at the right, and then main content in the middle. So that would lend itself to probably being a bit wider. I mean, I think this has all been really, really useful. I definitely need some time to practice and kind of process that. Is there more to know about this?
Well, to practice with this stuff, we are going to share with you the kind of code, the kind of blank template with just the coloured divs, and you can start practice adding in your own floats and your own widths and your own sizes, and you can see how it all changes. And actually, that didn't do what I was expecting it to do, and why didn't it do what I was expecting it to do? And then next session, and this is the kind of preview, we're going to start adding stuff to our pages. So we're going to have text and pictures, and we're going to have semantic elements where you've got headers and navs and footers and mains and all sorts. And having a kind of grounding in what float is doing is really useful when it then steps up to having floats with stuff, with content.
Yeah, I think that whole thing about the semantic elements, I mean, a question I often get asked by my pupils is, what's the difference between a div and a section? Why can't we use sections instead of divs? And it comes to the fact that sections are a semantic element. It's an element with meaning. It's to create a section, whereas div is just a generic kind of create a box and put stuff in it. And I think getting that idea across to pupils, and then the other semantic elements of headers, footers, navs, mains, and so on. And how the browser interprets them is going to be really important going forward. But certainly, seeing how we can do different layouts using those is really, really quite cool. And I'll be honest with you, Colin, we've got through that a lot faster than I think we thought we were going to.
I was confident all the way through, he says.
Even despite the tortured analogies.
Well, please give us some feedback on that, but please do not reference the puns. I'm taking no responsibility for any of Gordon's puns.
I take full responsibility. I found them punishing. Loved it. Good opportunities for problem solving. Yeah. What is the actual term for super floaty? To be honest with you, we didn't find one, which is why we came up with that term of super floaty. And super floaty was just kind of within the analogy of the pool, to try and make it.
Someone's put overlap in the chat.
Yeah, again, we could call it many different things. But I went with the term super floaty because it's about the behavior of that element. It's making that element behave slightly differently. It's taking it out of the flow, so it's sitting above it. So the effect it has is to overlap because its behavior has changed. I knew sometimes divs were under. Never thought it was super floaty. No, and again, it's one of those terms that I'll probably use with my pupils as I'm teaching it. But it's to build their understanding of what's happening. It's not something we would ever expect them to be able to explain in an exam or anything. But it is a big problem that things just start disappearing under each other. Also, puntacular. So it's one of these things that, you know, when we're explaining things to kids, we're using analogies. We come up with these little terms that aren't technical, but they're useful.
I think we will have made it in life if, when the higher team are marking exams, they have to mark the words super floaty.
I am absolutely going to encourage my higher class to be talking about super floaty.
I mean, even if they're doing the database sections, I'm thinking put super floaty in there.
Oh no, we'll get into software design and development. This variable is not a float in Python; it's super floaty. I'm looking forward to that one now.
Don't feel that we can move on until we answer the burning question that is, what is the unicorn's name?
I've been waiting for you to answer that one.
Exactly.
I mean, I think maybe we should set that as a challenge.
There'll be a prize.
Ursula, apparently. Umberto.
Ah, like
Yeah.
Umberto.
Okay. Underline
Underline the unicorn.
the unicorn.
Surely it's got to be super floaty, the unicorn.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm reading the more positive feedback. Very good analogy explaining how float works. I understand it much better now. Also, puntacular. Yes, thanks very much for that one. I'll be honest. The analogy, and I said to the team when we came up with it, was I literally went to ChatGPT and said, give me a team level explanation of floats, inlines, and blocks in HTML and CSS, and it churned through about 5. I did that 5 or 6 times, and this was the best one that came up. So thanks to ChatGPT for that. And I think that's another good pedagogical point about how AI can support us, is if you're looking for an analogy, put in, how do I explain this concept and give it very clear kind of guidelines to teenagers, and it will come up with an analogy for you. And then you've just got to make a decision about, is that one that will work? First time I've kind of done that and got some really good stuff. So yeah, brilliant. I think we'll stick with Colin and hand over to Ian and move towards our plenary, which there's a random box floating there.
Yes, thank you very much. So I particularly liked how the form stuff linked with the programming and the database stuff, and I think that was a really important point, that if you've not taught databases, or if you've got a Nat 5 class coming through that haven't done databases, to kind of emphasize what is validation and why do we have it and why do we need it, and look, here's some examples of it in real life that you've probably come across. So thanks to Maggie and Ian for taking us through that.
It was all Maggie. She put it all together, and I think, yeah, the links are great. And really enjoyed, Colin, your explanation. Not so much Gordon's puns of how to do this, the floating around stuff. I don't think I'll look at a swimming pool the same again.
I'm not going to look at a unicorn the same, to be honest.
Looking forward to kind of next time about how we go about putting the actual content in, because we've all had problems of our students losing stuff and can't get the quite exact layout or something like that. So it'd be really interesting to see what we come up with that.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest kind of frustration in web, that you can have two kids sitting next to each other with almost identical code that have completely different layouts, and it will just be a small thing here or there that's just totally messed up the whole thing. So hopefully next time we'll be able to tackle some of that, and we'll be able to help with that.
Give me a software program to debug any day of the week as opposed to a website. Yeah, so we've obviously done quite a lot about looking at the links between different topics. And I know we're all really busy with the school's turn this week, but obviously these STACS sessions are not just focusing on websites. We had a session last night on SDD. I dropped into the end of it, and it was really good. They took through, they were looking at standard algorithms at higher, so they looked at how to implement them, and they were talking about a range of different languages and the different approaches they could.
I didn't see that. I wasn't around last night, but I know that the video will be online at some point, and that's going to be really useful. And even if it's just linear search, that's the one they always find the most difficult. I'm just going to kind of focus in on that. You can just scroll through to that bit and then kind of use that as a kind of starting point. And then I know the database stuff is going to be on Thursday, and it's again getting that sort of link between these different parts of the course, having the web and the database and the programming all come together.
Yeah, it sure is, and you know what else is, you know, these sessions are great. They're virtual, it's fantastic, but we've also got a face-to-face STACS session coming up, not that far away, 3rd of February, at St Aloysius in Glasgow. The team at STACS are going to be sending out details. It's going to be a great chance for us to get together. I know there's people here that might be in single-person departments, so get together, network, share ideas, share thoughts, and look at some more complex ideas about how we could do it and deliver it and help our students face-to-face. And it says here, with experts on hand to help.
Oh, so that's why I've not been invited then?
Yeah, I don't know where we're getting the experts from. But yeah, hopefully there'll be a load of people from the STACS tutor team and other people there that we can all get together and just kind of share ideas about how best to deliver computing science to our students.
And it's one of those where you don't actually get that many opportunities to actually meet with other people. Even within the authority that I work in, we hardly ever see another computing teacher. Yeah. So actually having that opportunity to get together should be really useful.
Yep. So our next session on it's not long after the face-to-face, it's the same week, kind of the 5th, and that's where, as Collins alluded to, we start putting stuff into boxes, looking at the semantic HTML elements, the non-semantic HTMLs, adding margins, adding margins and padding to make beautiful websites.
Is that a dig at my all N5 websites are ugly comment from a previous session?
Or looking at some of the SQ assignment websites. So that, of course, that next session is our last session. But as I said, all the recordings from all the 2 sessions we've done before and this session will be online. And STACS are always here to kind of support us with everything going forward.
And then by the time we have hopefully that face-to-face one and our next session, the courseworks will be out and published, and it might be an opportunity to discuss some of them.
And all this upskilling that we've been doing and supporting each other will hopefully have a positive impact with our learners, and we'll see those our learners more comfortable with the coursework.
Fingers crossed. I think there is plans for an after party, so if you want to hang on and ask us any questions about this content or previous content or what we're doing next time, or got any ideas that you want to share, then feel free to hang on and kind of give us any feedback or any anything that you want to share or discuss.
Hopefully there'll be no more puns in the after party.
I make no promises. Right, I'm gonna do this one. I'm just gonna sit and stare at each other.
No,
Has anybody actually got a date for the assignments yet? Do we know when they're coming out?
15th.
Is it the 15th?
of this one? This
Mhm.
month.
15th of Jan. No, it's
Oh.
normally later than that. I thought I was aiming for around the 30th, 31st.
I
I
was
know.
out. Oh, very good. We'll all be
Brilliant.
on it. We'll all be spending that weekend looking at them.
Sure.
It's a Monday, isn't it? So
Oh, is it a Monday?
it's Monday coming. A week yesterday. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Oh wow! Look, that is really early.
Yeah, it's really early this year.
Which
Brilliant.
then is always the worry. How early do they want them back?
14th of March.
14th of
Well,
March
that's
for National
very
Pride.
yeah. The higher is much the same as last year, I think. in the month.
15th, 16th, 17th of April.
Mhm.
Are you very welcome, Kevin?
You actually think that that April date is really far away, so you don't have to worry about it, and then you remember you've got 2 weeks of Easter, which actually negates all that extra time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still got to be done by the end of March.
I'm just seeing that some of the comments coming in the chat.
Yeah.
Kevin saying excellent session. Thanks for much appreciated. And Anna saying thanks for putting it all together. Found it useful. We'll see you in Glasgow. So it'll be
That's
good to
great.
see.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
another one. Hopefully, see folk in Glasgow. So
Yeah, I'm going to make a point of coming through from Edinburgh and seeing what's going on. So
Yep.
I'll line up some excellent puns for that morning.
Are you bringing?
That is the most important thing.
No, the
Yeah.
most important question is who's bringing the unicorn?
Oh, somebody has to bring a unicorn floaty. Can we bring a unicorn float or a unicorn super float? So we've got we haven't been delivering web at Nat 5 or higher since the course modifications, so feel less confident about delivering the topic in the future. And that's perfectly fair. I'd be the same with database.
Yep.
I've not delivered database since then, so not sure how likely it is for all topics to be reintroduced with potential form to the education system. And I've just seen Anna saying, "Don't tempt me." I'm assuming that's about bringing a unicorn. Feel free. Yeah, I mean, with the potential reform, I would take a very strong bet that we're not going to reintroduce both topics. We're going to keep the optionality between both topics going forward until the whole system changes, and then it's going to be a wholesale kind of change. Wholesale's probably over-egging it a wee bit. But the SQA, speaking to some of the senior SQA reps, they're not going to be going back on that and suddenly like next year coming in and saying, yeah, let's go back to both topics. And if they do, then I know most of us as SQA appointees will be fighting that. What I would be saying is, and I'm doing this in my school now, is I'm starting to reintroduce database, which I mean I've just inherited a school that hadn't done database for a couple of years, rightly or wrongly. But I'm starting to reintroduce database content into Nat 5 to set them up for moving on to higher, particularly for those kids that are going to go on to do advanced higher, because most of the integration is with database. So I wanted to get them just a wee flavour of SQL. I'm not going to assess them on it. I'm not worried about them having a big understanding of it, but just to get them those ideas and just easing some of that pressure in advanced higher of trying to learn all the advanced higher content and a good chunk, pretty much the Nat 5 and higher database content. And it would be the same the other way around. Doing some of the web, if you've been focusing on database, doing some of the web, reintroducing elements of that in Nat 5 to higher, so that if they come on to, because within the database content at advanced higher, we can now assess form elements
yeah.
within the database section. So it's worth just, I think, introducing it as almost a wee kind of side topic.
We do an SQL unit in S2.
Yep.
And it's just a single table. And I got it off. There's a great website. I don't know. It's mainly English based, but it's 101 computing, and it's an investigation.
Yeah.
It's about a gem suspects.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's great. The kids love it, and they then are going into third year having done. It's only one table, and it's just. But they actually use wildcards. They use ands and ors. and they use comparative operators. So it's just a great wee introduction to it and a bit of fun as well.
I do SQL with first year.
Yeah, that's great.
I give them.
I mean, if we're playing that game, I do SQL with primary sevens.
But I give them the query design. So in the same way that you would, the kind of the national 5 would write their own query designs, I give them the query designs and then just turn it into SQL.
Yeah,
And is that in Access?
Yes.
it is. But we do up to higher in Access, so you know.
See, since all the COVID stuff, we've done the web unit, but we still do databases with third year. But I don't hate Access because I've used it for years, but I just find it so clunky when all I want to do is write an SQL query.
And you've got to go through all that.
And I've got to go through all those steps, and actually half the time the kids are remembering what's the steps I've got to go through, as opposed to what do I put on the where line.
Yeah. But I actually, because when I was at one of my previous schools, we had to use the query builder because in second year they were then going to be going on maybe to admin and IT, where that's what the expectation is that they've got to use because they're in faculty.
Yeah.
Now being in a single subject, I've abandoned all that because we just go straight to SQL. It makes life a million times easier for embedding it later. And for those that aren't really getting it, well, there's strong indications that progression on isn't maybe for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. I'm just seeing, we're saying the same there, you know, BIT and S1, S2, which is business admin and computing. So we've got to make little compromises on our subject for those that are going to go off and do admin.
That's the gemstone thing. I've just put a link in there, and I just built a wee PowerPoint around it, but they gave you all the kind of clues, and then from that clue they had to pick out the information and build up an SQL statement. And they give you the database as well.
Oh, and you can use their online SQL editor.
Yeah, they've got, so you wouldn't necessarily have to go into Access. So
I've not seen that one, but we're about to reintroduce database into S1.
It does, it looks good.
And I think you've just written my entire kind of course plan for me. So
no, it's love it, and we have a wee prize at the end. You know, who's going to, find the suspects and things like that. So make it a bit fun.
Yeah, I'll just put that in my favourites, so I've got it for tomorrow.
Yeah. See code HS in the SQL tab. Do the kids need an account to use it? It's the sign-in's not the issue. It's the fact that you have to sign in.
Yeah, and if you've got your own domain, Microsoft stuff. This is something we're running into our school. Is when you click on the sign in with Microsoft, your organization doesn't allow external sign-ins. So then you've got to use the email method, and then you're breaching GDPR potentially. I've had very loose contact with CodeHS just before the holidays as a potential Replit replacement. We're also working. Jamon is working with the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and they're also working on teacher teams similar to what Replit had. But again, both of those might come with costs. They might come with GDPR type issues. So we're in that kind of wait out kind of phase just now.
I did find that quite entertaining in the software session last night. They were talking about IDEs. And I was thinking, if this was delivered 6 months ago, REPL would be front and center.
Yeah.
And they didn't mention it at all.
No.
Because the AI's killed it.
Yeah. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is Replit actually had the right approach, which was I create a class, it creates a link. I share that with the class. They click the link. They create a username that's anonymous, a password, and there's no GDPR issues there. And that workaround was ideal. Everyone was happy with that. It's just Replit went and shot themselves in the foot. And I mean, I'm still on the Replit forums, and they're upping the prices of all their other packages as well. And just the amount of complaints about what they're doing is, I think they're going to collapse under their own weight in the next year.
The hacker package they had was £79, which I paid for because I've got I've got loads of solutions there, and kids had worked out how to get to them.
Yeah.
So I wanted them to be private, and when it came to assignment, I wanted to do an assignment in REPL, so it needed to be private. So I paid the £79 out of my own pocket, which was fine. But the £100 odd they now want me to pay for a core plan, is ridiculous.
Yeah, they're pushing themselves out. Whereas something like the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which is set up for education, it's I think they've probably got more chance of success because they understand the market a little bit better.
And even if they do go for Raspberry Pi, do go for a paid product, because it's a foundation, because it's for education, they're not going to set it a price that's aimed at making a profit.
And as Brendan, as you say, actually, if ScotGov and SQA were to say, I think, God forbid the SQA would say, like they've done with web, it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, those are the languages. We went down the line of software design and development saying, these are the two languages that we are looking for you to use, or these are the languages, and here's a platform. That would be brilliant. I mean, there's Jupyter notebooks out there. Oh, they're horse.
But local authorities would still turn around and go, you can't use it until we've done our own DPIA because we are the data controller.
Yeah.
Which is why the conversations have gone round and round and round about why Education Scotland can't globally approve an app.
Yeah.
Because they're not the data. Within Glow, they're the data I think they're the data controller. But maybe not. I think there's still a level within Glow of an opt-in from the authorities. Like, Gordon put Jupyter Notebook there. Jupyter Notebook from Edinburgh is accessible via Glow, but yet I can't get to it because Midlothian Council has not approved it.
Yeah. But
it's within Glow. And I'm not going to ask Midlothian Council to approve it until I've tried it. But I don't think everybody's Jupyter Notebooking.
No.
So when you see the conversation, loads of people can't get to it.
No, they're pretty complex to just set up initially and get into. I think that puts people off.
I think I attended a webinar and they talked about it, but they didn't show it. So I just went, well, if you're not showing me, I'm not going to.
Well, even before you get into that level, you can't see what title's doing. And not for the education side of things. Right. We got there. We got tonight done. Day 2 of the new term.
A nice short session tonight, nice and straightforward, I thought.
Yeah. And look forward to margins and padding and content and all those good things for the next one.
That's going to be fun.
Start working them up this weekend, I think. Yeah, and I think that's the challenge we face is we're dealing with things that have really complex definitions and complex behaviors. We're trying to get that fine line between, this is why it's doing this thing. But that's a problem for not tonight. That's a problem for the next few days.
Yep.
I'm going to go get some dinner.
Thanks. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for everything.
Okay. Everyone.
And I'm going to go and see what Debbie's bullying me with about unicorns in the group chat. Okay. Take care. Bye now. Bye.